Hello, Baker here, and I'd like to ask you a question. What makes FF14 such a great game? Now, you may find that is a very difficult question to answer. It's easy to say, I love this game, and you might even say things such as, I like the story, or the music is really good. But when it comes to these things, it's always hard to properly explain what were the exact factors that made you enjoy the game, since it's a huge game, so there are lots of moving parts, right? The idea of this series of videos then is to break down FF14 storytelling and game design into parts and to discuss them in greater detail. In so doing, I hope to draw attention to some aspects of the game that maybe don't get discussed as often. And whereas I usually focus on a specific topic, such as a certain character or a specific expansion, these ones focus on more broader topics that apply across all of FF14 and even much of the Final Fantasy franchise. You should also know there are no spoilers for this video, so feel free to watch regardless of where you are in the MSQ. I know the title might seem a bit cringe, but it is true. These things made me fall in love with the game. So let's talk about the first topic, the summons. Yes, I decided to pick summons as the first topic because for me, the first big moment that really made me fall in love with this game was when I fought Titan and of course the subsequent scenes. The fight itself was amazing, really well made and gave off such classic FF vibes. It was definitely the first time this game really blew me away with what it could do. But it's not like this was some special experience I had. Nah, this was very much deliberate. See, when Naoki Yoshida took over in 1.0, he had a clear vision for what he wanted this reimagined FF14 to be like. This of course involved many things, some of which I am sure I will be discussing throughout this series. But one of the things he felt strongly about was to make FF14 feel more like an FF title, since the original 1.0 was lacking in many of these aspects. And I am talking about many concrete things we connect to Final Fantasy, things such as chocobos, moogles, black mages, dragoons and, surprise surprise, summons. FF14 was to feature more summon battles, return of many original summon designs, making summons a huge part of the game's story, as well as the summoner job itself. Even the revival of the game itself featured Bahamut, the most iconic summon in the franchise, literally destroying the old game. And it worked. The summons, or primals as they are called in FF14, played a key role in giving 14 that classic Final Fantasy vibe. And that's something I wished exactly to highlight with this video, to discuss the importance of summons in 14 and how well they are handled. But first and foremost, we'll have to go over some franchise history to better understand what the FF14 devs were going for when they decided to implement summons or primals into FF14. Summons have been an integral part of the series for a long time. They were added in FF3 as part of the evoker/summoner job. There are two aspects to summoning. There's gameplay and there's story. I'll cover the gameplay part of it later when I talk about the summoner job. As for story, in its first iteration in FF3, the summons didn't have any story relevance. They were just powerful attacks as part of the job. But FF4 changed that in a huge way. In 4, they made summons a very integral part of both the game world and the story. The summons became characters in the story with their own interests. They also had a central character representing the job, that of course being Rydia, so the idea was to blend summons in both gameplay and story. Since then, it's been kinda jumping from game to game. Sometimes summons played a huge role in the story, whereas in other games they weren't quite as relevant and more just in the background and as a gameplay mechanic. This is important to note because the last two mainline titles before 14 belonged in the latter group, as in 12 and 13 had the summons take a backseat compared to, say, 9 and 10 that came before them. Not only that, but both games also changed summons in a big way, which definitely turned off some fans. In 12, traditional summons such as Ifrit, Shiva, Leviathan, Bahamut, etc. weren't in the game as summons, but were instead names given to airships. Following that, we had FF13, where they took many of the iconic summons such as Odin, Bahamut, Shiva and so on, and completely changed their design to fit this mech aesthetic. To no one's surprise, this upset a lot of people. Now, whenever stuff like this happens, you have people defending it by saying, oh well, they just want to do something new. They don't want to be limited by these toxic hardcore fans who only want to have their nostalgia trip by seeing their childhood relived. And to an extent that is true. If you become stagnated and you regurgitate the same ideas in every iteration with only minor alterations, then your art is shallow, but you can't go all the way. Just look at a character like Luke Skywalker. In the Disney Star Wars trilogy, they wanted to change his character completely, and it backfired. It backfired because this character had become so iconic and beloved by fans, and they had conjured a certain image in their head of what they expect of said character, that when they turn one of the most iconic protagonists in cinema history into a cave hermit and a coward, yeah, naturally people were going to be turned off by that. The way I personally view it is, it's fine to want to mix things up as an artist, but you should also respect things that are iconic, because they have become iconic for a reason. And that's something 13 failed to do. It pretty much had no respect for the original design of those summons, so naturally, people weren't happy about it. Does it necessarily make the work itself bad? No, but it means you have made a poor choice that caused previous fans to dislike that part of your game. This is exactly why the FF14 devs were so enthusiastic with bringing back these iconic summons and sticking to their themes. Iconic summons like Bahamut, Ifrit, Leviathan, Shiva, etc. return, and they are actually true to their iconic designs, meaning Shiva is the Ice Queen summon and not a bloody mortar cycle. In addition, they were represented in the story in a way that pays homage to the older titles. For example, Ifrit, like in many of the games, is the first summon you fight in the story, and he still has a rivalry with another summon. Or how Shiva was always the most humanoid summon, which is represented by her being an actual person in FF14. But what about the point brought up earlier? If they simply rehash the old summons, does it not get stale? Well, does it feel stale in FF14? I bet most of you will answer with no. And the reason is because the FF14 devs simultaneously respected the old while creating new things unique to 14. Whenever they release new expansions, they of course add those throwback summons, but they also like to add all new summons into the mix too. So an expansion MSQ would typically have 1 to 2 summons unique to FF14, while having 2 to 3 as callbacks. By doing this, they can satisfy fans of the series while still being able to add new ones. A revolutionary concept, right? But I wish to emphasize that this was the reason summons failed in some previous titles, while they worked in 14, because the devs ate their cake and kept it too. You could say that what I had just discussed about appealing to fans and keeping the FF vibes is simply the foundation, because what truly makes the summons in 14 so great is that they have a lot of personality. They get really fleshed out in the story, which is what makes them so appealing. I mentioned that some previous FF games featured the summons heavily in their stories, but FF14 takes that to the next level. It has way more lore surrounding them than any previous game. The mechanics/rules for summoning set a solid foundation. You need Ether, usually supplied in crystal form, combined with Faith/Prayer. Then we have the image of the summoner or summoners, which influence what the primal will end up looking like. Once a primal is summoned, it's able to empower its followers as well as create mindless drones by tempering. A primal's defeat also isn't final, as it can be resummoned over and over, given these conditions to summon it can still be met. And finally, a primal's existence is a danger to the planet itself, because over time, it will always bleed the surrounding environment completely dry of ether to maintain its concrete form. There's a lot more to summoning, but this is just the fundamental bare bones set of rules. These rules are easy to grasp and they do a good enough job at explaining it throughout A Realm Reborn. Using this set of rules, the writers come up with interesting ways for primals to be summoned. It could be in what form the primal takes, in how its followers obtain the requisite ether for the summoning, in who is summoning them, how they temper individuals, in what the summoners wish to achieve versus what the primal actually causes. Then there are the factors that play in the background, such as politics and all that fun stuff, so there is always something fresh about each primal. This is why, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of the trials in the MSQ are primals, you never get tired of them. There's never a point where you'd go, it's another primal, because the circumstances around the summoning always vary by a lot and they mix things up. Even those classic summons have their own interesting background and FF14 spin on why they came to be. Mind you, this often is not the case in the FF series. Individual summons often have either very little or no story at all tied to them. In that sense, I appreciate the devs making each summon stand out instead of just being the next thing you fight. And then we have of course the fights themselves. Oh my god, they are so good. There's just something about getting to fight a primal in FF14 that always gets me so pumped. The build-up is always good and the fights are so cool, from the flashiness of the animations, to the stellar ultimates, to the amazing phase transitions, and who can forget the most important thing of all, the banger tunes provided by Mr. Sorkin. The music perfectly fits the atmosphere and the lyrics always have some significance, often singing about either the primal's predicament or how they are going to fuck you up. All in all, you can really tell how much effort the devs put into these fights. Finally, let's talk about the summoner job itself. First, we have to once again go over how this used to work in the past. The basic idea for summons in Final Fantasy is that you summon this huge mythical creature to deliver a powerful attack. Summons were often used by the summoner job or by some other means such as magicite or materia. You often had to do something special to attain these summons first, though the most common way was to simply defeat them in combat. This attack would generally be more effective than other spells, especially when it came to wanting to easily destroy multiple targets, but its main drawback was the heavy MP cost. So when it comes to summoning, you could think of it as utilizing artillery. You deliver a lot of damage at once, especially when it comes to a large area, but you can't spam it. Of course, there were exceptions to this in certain games. Sometimes summons would persist and fight either in your place or alongside you instead of simply doing a single attack. Sometimes they didn't cost MP and so on. Additionally, there were summons that would offer more than simply doing damage, such as causing status ailments, buffing teammates and other such utility. The most notable of these special type of summons were Odin, whose Chan Tetsuken attack had the potential to cleave all enemies in half, ending the battle in a single turn, and Phoenix, whose Rebirth Flame both did fire damage and revive/healed allies. When A Realm Reborn came out, the summoner job came with it. Sadly, they couldn't implement a proper summoner due to not really having the time available to overcome a lot of technical hurdles, so they settled with a scuffed pet and a ton of dots as the job's mechanics. They have since then slowly tried to change the job to go towards the direction of what they originally wanted, and the Endwalker Summoner was really the culmination of those efforts. With the way the current summoner works, it actually has incorporated more or less all the elements from different summons that we saw. The ultimates from Ifrit, Titan and Garuda act as the old school first implementation of summons, where they appear only to do one big attack and then leave. Bahamut and Phoenix on the other hand represent the more modern design from 10, 12, 13 and 7 remake, where the summon persists for a while but still has an ultimate that can be activated when the player wishes. The elemental attacks and favor attacks you get when summoning the 3 elemental primals seems to be a future design, as it seems to be how summons will work in 16, which is this idea of the summons enhancing your own attacks without actually being present. In addition, that whole utility aspect is present in Phoenix through Everlasting Flight and Rekindle, as well as Carbuncle's Radiant Aegis. So from a class fantasy point of view, the summoner job is also a huge W, with a nice blend of different ways summons have been used in the series. Personally, if I was to make one wish for 7.0 summoner, it would be to have a different set of 3 summons after summoning Phoenix. This would help make the rotation more interesting, but more importantly, it would mean getting Ramu, Leviathan and Shiva to complete the set. And I mean, how badass would it be to have a cycle of 8 summons? Actually, there is one gripe I have. Yoshida has previously expressed interest in adding Eggy Glamours into the game. Towards the end of Heavensward, Yoshida stated they would be adding Eggy Glamours starting with patch 3.5 and every once in a while from there. Since it's 6.1 and we still haven't seen a single Eggy Glam, we can infer it was either just not possible or it was put so low on priority it basically never came up. Either way, I think it's a shame. The game has so many cool summons and it would be awesome to be able to customize them. Get that feeling like in those older games where you just have a ton of different summons. When they announce glams for Summoner, I will be over the moon. So, going back to that statement Mr. Yoshida had about implementing more Final Fantasy elements into 14, I think they pulled it off really well when it came to summons. Consider that between 10 and A Realm Reborn was a 12-year gap. For fans like me, the way summons were handled in 14 was an absolute blessing. It was a glorious return to form, as summons were cool again. And FF16, also made by CBU3, seems to be heading towards the same direction. I mean, even the logo of the game features 2 summons, which should tell you what kind of a role they will play. And also emphasizes the whole point of this video about how important summons are to the series. Well, that's all I have to say on the topic. I hope you enjoyed this type of a video where I'm analyzing more broader concepts of the game. I will be making more of these in the near future, so if these videos interest you, feel free to drop a sub to stick around. Have a nice day.